Hello and welcome everyone to this online webinar on the UNODC's RansomAware Campaign. My name is Petra P. Shomshin and I'll be emceeing throughout this event. So ransomware, as we know, has increasingly become a common digital threat among the modern societies. Everybody, and that includes myself, yourself, your organizations, your businesses, can fall a victim of ransomware. With the development of technology and digital advancement, ransomware attacks have grown tremendously. The cybercrime targets sectors ranging from healthcare, education, to legal and financial sectors, and especially under the COVID-19 pandemic, where more people like ourselves are working from home or working remotely, ransomware attacks have increased by a shocking 148% in 2020 and 600% in the Asia Pacific region. So let me describe briefly what ransomware is before we learn more from the panelists today. Ransomware is primarily a form of malware where access to a computer is blocked until ransom is paid. This malicious software can be installed onto your devices simply by clicking on the link that contains the virus. So imagine once the link is clicked on, attackers will be granted the access to control the organization's systems and machines, allowing them to access and control encryptions of important files. Attackers will then demand a ransom for those stolen files. For many cases, victims end up paying ransom but not able to gain a total access to their data, or being demanded to pay even more, or being targeted again by the criminals. In the Asia Pacific region, the evolution of ransomware is a serious concern as rapid change in technology results in advancing threats. Some cyber attacks have evolved from traditional ransomware, and by that I mean they no longer rely on automated malware alone, and organizations are facing data protection challenges even more. 82% of IT decision makers in Asia Pacific region are concerned that their current data protection solutions might not meet the future threats. As I mentioned earlier, a wide range of sectors can be targeted with ransomware. Healthcare institutions, to begin with, perceive ransomware attacks as a serious threat that may unfortunately lead to life-threatening incidents for clients and patients, as hospitals store important data that are critical not only for their patients but for their own staff. Education sector, similar to small and medium-sized businesses, is also prone to ransomware attacks due to the budgetary constraint, leaving less fund for IT departments and cyber defense. And for legal and financial bodies, ransomware attacks target on the classified data, clients' personal information like social security numbers, credit card details, and medical records, making these sectors also vulnerable to cyber criminals. So generally speaking, ransomware is closer to home than we may be aware of. So in today's webinar, we will be learning more from the panelists from both the government and private sectors about ransomware, its potential damages, its acceleration by the pandemic, and most importantly, how can organizations and individuals protect themselves from such cybercrime, how to develop and implement cybersecurity practices, and how to raise awareness in prevention ransomware. So in today's webinar, there will be two panel discussions coming up, respectively by the government agencies and from the private sector. Coming up, we have an opening remark from UNODC Cybercrime and Cryptocurrency Advisor, Mr. Alexandru Cachuluo.
Thank you very much. So that was very good introduction and the description of the topic. I think I'll focus a bit in these opening remarks on some of the work that UNODC has been doing in this field and how we came about putting together this campaign. As you've mentioned in the beginning, ransomware is becoming one of the top priorities around the world, unfortunately, one of the top cybercrimes. We've seen ransomware hit all types of government sectors, critical infrastructure, and we've seen critical infrastructure being crippled for several days. With that, UNODC has been working, especially here in the region, with countries to help them address the ransomware threat. As this is becoming a lot more important, and governments are focusing a lot more their attention on this, we have been developing a lot of training courses to support investigators to investigate trace transactions on blockchain. We know that cryptocurrencies are the main method of payment for ransomware. So obviously, we've been doing a lot of work in the cryptocurrency space. We're working with countries in the region to support them to come up with the regulation, because as the FATF recommends, to have a minimum set of regulation in place in each country to mandate crypto exchanges to keep data on their customers. This can obviously help us fight ransomware. But unfortunately, I mean, not only the enforcement side can keep us safe, right? So enforcement will go after the criminals and hopefully create a deterrent. But at the beginning, we should prevent, and that's the best method, obviously. Once you have been hit with a ransomware attack, unfortunately, you don't have that many options. You either have to pay, and as we've mentioned also, payment does not equate in regaining access to data. Also, ransomware gangs, once they encrypt this data, they also, before that, manage to take over and copy all this data, whereas especially important parts of data. And then paying ransom, you gain access back to the data. Ideally, in an ideal world, you gain access back to the data, but that doesn't prevent criminals from still using that data or going to a competitor and so on. So unfortunately, once you've been hit, you don't have that many options, and it is not an ideal position. So we have to look at what happens before. How can we prevent ransomware? And of course, awareness is an important, is a key aspect of this cycle. So as we've been working with countries, with governments in the region and supporting them to strengthen their enforcement side, we've seen that we have to also look at the prevention. So therefore, we came up with this campaign. So I hope that throughout these 2 months, we'll have a really good reach to government, but also to society. We've created a really interesting campaign, and we have materials. This is a regional campaign that will go throughout Southeast Asia and be featured on various media. We have materials that have been translated in several languages of the region, including in Thai, in Vietnamese, Bahasa, Chinese, and English, of course. So, and my colleague Nina will present in more detail the exact focus of the campaign. So with that, I'd like to kick off, and hope we'll have an interesting event. Looking forward for the discussions and for the development of the campaign. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alexandru. So as Alexandru mentioned, the UNODC has been actively participating in promoting regional ransomware and cybersecurity under the campaign called RansomAware. And now we have Kun Thanita Wongprasert from the UNODC Cybercrime Communication Officer to explain more about this launch on the RansomAware campaign.
So our campaign RansomAware, I would like to start with, just imagine yourself that you are, well, you open your computer or laptop, and then this is the kind of message that you see, that you are locked out from your own personal devices or data or the files, so on. What would you do? Because, you know, these type of things are not taught in school, right? But it can happen to anyone. On the individual basis, it may disrupt your work or your studies, or on a larger scale. For example, let's say with the government, it can be considered a matter of national security. For company, they might be considering, you know, financial and reputational loss with regards to ransomware. So this is why exactly we are launching this campaign, because we believe that it is easier that we implement some cybersecurity practices to prevent ransomware, rather than having to go through all this process to pay for the ransom, and it's complicated. So it's much more simpler to prevent it from happening to begin with. So yeah, this is why we are launching a RansomAware campaign, because we would like to equip everyone who can be affected by ransomware with this new type of knowledge on ransomware prevention. Just the overview of the campaign. Basically, what we're saying is that ransomware is a real threat and it can happen to anyone, right? However, there are ways for us to become less vulnerable to such attacks. So we are raising the awareness on the risk, prevention and mitigation of ransomware. So this campaign is online and social media based, because we recognize that this is where our audience are. This is where the crime takes place. So the campaign is running in the Asian Pacific region, starting from today until the 4th of March. So all the content that we have produced and disseminated are in 5 languages, as Alex has mentioned. We have content in English, Thai, Chinese, Vietnamese, and Bahasa Indonesia. So based on our audience analysis, and we find out that actually anyone can become a target. When we were trying to map out who would be mostly affected by ransomware, it's actually everyone. So this campaign, we are communicating with the public sector, with the government, the private sector, as well as general public. In terms of what we are communicating in this campaign, so this is our content journey. We are starting by raising the awareness on the threat of ransomware. Obviously, it has become one of the most prominent malware threats, not just in the region, but around the world. And there are several methods that criminals can attack you with ransomware, right? Phishing email, etc. And when the attack happens, it does cause a lot of damages on different levels. But however, the public or the government and businesses, you can do actions, you can take some actions to prevent it from happening, just simply by following basic cybersecurity best practices. And shall the incident occur to you, it is important that we help report such attacks so that it can be further prevented by the law enforcement agencies in your respective countries. So available on our website, which I'll be sharing you quite later on, we have a list of infographics. We have so many of them available on the website, so you can check it out later. Basically, just to raise the awareness on how you can prevent it, and if it happens to you, what kind of action would you be taking in order to mitigate it? I'm pretty sure that our fellow panelists will be diving more into details on that. We also have some visuals that are social media friendly, available along with the caption as well. So you can learn much more about ransomware on our website. We have the video which we will be showing after this presentation. Just a brief summary of what you can do around ransomware prevention. So the information and materials that I have shared with you, you can get much more into detail on bit.ly/ransomaware. This is our campaign landing page, and where most of the campaign materials are located, so for your downloads. I just encourage you, as we have stressed multiple times here, it can happen to you. Ransomware can happen to anyone, and you can prevent it from happening. And these materials would help you equip with the knowledge and skill to know basically what you have to do. And these are the resources that are worth sharing. So if you would like to support this campaign, please share it with people in your circle, within your organization or your agencies to stay safe. And thank you.
Indeed, it's like you said, ransomware can happen to everyone, and I think it's I think I say this for everyone, it's better to prevent it, right, than recover it. Okay, so this we will move on to a wider overview of ransomware in the Asia Pacific region, and this will be led by Paul Pacaris, Senior Threat Researcher and Liaison to Interpol from Trend Micro. Excuse me. Please welcome Paul.
Thank you, Peter P. So I will be sharing my screen now. First of all, that was a very nice introduction from Alexander. He said about we need to look back on some of the ransomware incidents so we can learn from it, of course. And yeah, great campaign initiatives from presented by Tanita. So for now, we will be delving into some of the technical details of ransomware, but mainly how is the ransomware in the Asia Pacific region. So good afternoon all, I'm Paul Pajares. I am a senior threat researcher from Trend Micro. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm currently a liaison to Interpol, so since 2019. So now I'm giving you the latest updates on the ransomware roundup. Okay, let's begin. Here is the Trend Micro telemetry data, statistics of ransomware detections in 2020. So as you can see, 82% accounted to Asia region, including the Russia. About 21 million of WannaCry detections, as you can see here, it's actually 50% or half of the overall ransomware detections. So the total is 41.2 million. So that was 2020. It means that there are some devices or machines that are still vulnerable by SMB exploitation, or these are just remnants of detections. So the remaining detections includes the notorious ransomware or the targeted ransomware that impacted to thousands to millions of dollars of asset value of the victim companies. So now this is the 2021 statistics or telemetry data for ASEAN region from Trend Micro Detections. You can see that Thailand had 1 million detections for last year, and highly impacted by the notorious ransomware or active ransomware operators like Hive, Lockbit, and Nephilim. The countries like Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Philippines have hundred thousands of detections, with the top ransomware families like Ryuk, Nephilim, Lockbit, Sodinokibi, and Decaf, which is developed from Golang programming language. So overall, there is like a 3.7 millions of detections in that region, and that for the 2021 statistics or the annual report, it's still on the way. So you can refer to trendmicro.com for that. Okay, so let's take a look at the notorious ransomware family. So the government, the cybersecurity entities, the companies, and all should be paying attention to these ransomware families. Well, the first is the Conti. So these are all affecting the ASEAN region. Conti made headlines before, ransomware attack in the healthcare sector in Ireland, if you remember it. So their average payment is 600,000 US dollars. So the monetary value here came from Coveware. So because we don't have visibility, but it makes sense how much money do the ransomware operators get. So same amount goes with Nephilim, with 220,000 of detections from Trend Micro. It's mainly targeting Thailand. And if you also recently heard about the Revil's arrest, it affected the Sodinokibi malware, but on an average, they have like 25,000 US of dollars of demand. So the Ryuk had very high ransomware payment as well. As we know, the threat actors, they are relying their demand based on the revenue of the company victim. So yeah, we are also seeing different active ransomware like Lockbit 2.0, and there are several victims company, and also the Hive leaks. Maybe it's a new ransomware as a service that involves highly lucrative ransomware business impacting the healthcare. In So the previous data was 2021. So it's a cumulative number of detections. But in here, in the next series of slides, will be a unique detection or possible per company detection or per endpoint, so that we can oversee the unique detections from June 2021 to January of 2022. So it's no surprise that the top countries like India, Taiwan, China, Japan, Thailand, Indonesia, and Malaysia are highly affected by ransomware due to their business aspects. Let's say also their locations, such as manufacturing sectors are ideal, or outsourcing of companies are also ideal in these countries. In terms of sectors affected, here are the crucial target, like the manufacturing companies that can impact business flows, like the supplies. And for government, the attackers look for the gems or the confidential data, but before that they look for vulnerabilities, because as we know, mostly of the government systems are vulnerable, or their system are left unpatched. For healthcare, of course, it's a serious risk, a serious threat. So we've been seeing it, let's say the Hive ransomware. So even in Ireland before, the healthcare sector there. So what I can say is that the threat actors are really not considering, and even the health sector. So in terms of the product segment, it's no wonder that enterprise has the highest detections, 62.9%, of course. They mainly target companies. But in terms of small, medium businesses or SMB, they're also affected. It's just that the concern over there is that they are lax, or maybe they have insufficient budget for cybersecurity implementation, because as we know, they only have a small profit. And meanwhile, the consumer here can indicate that they are related to some endpoint detections. All right, I hope it's not fast. Just sharing with the graph. Anyway, if you can get a copy of this, it's better. It's TLP green. So for the monthly movement of ransomware activities, the January is increasing, as you can notice. We expect in the next coming months to have more detections of ransomware. And in the recent arrest of Revil, the Sodino PB and Ryuk has been subsiding as operators are, keeping low or just rebranding to avoid the law enforcement. So yeah, in January 2022, so there is a need to monitor a sudden increase of Conti ransomware and other active and steady ransomware like Lockbit 2.0 and Nephilim. So WannaCry and Stop are also stable in terms of detections for like several months. Okay, next slide. Okay, we're now looking at the ASEAN countries. Just to summarize, Thailand has a variety of ransomware family detections among our Ryuk, Sodinokibi, Hive, and Conti. Indonesia was hit before by DarkSide. I have no more details about it, but according to our telemetry, it states that there's a lot of detections of DarkSide. And Lockbit and Nephilim are on ASEAN region as well. So as mentioned earlier, the WannaCry and Stop ransomware have been stable in terms of detection in this region as well. So we continue also to observe the prevalence of Ryuk, Nephilim, and the Lockbit 2.0. All right. In this case, we are looking for the sectors in the ASEAN region. In Malaysia and Thailand, they are highly targeted by ransomware. First sector is the manufacturing companies at risk on countries like Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand. Healthcare in Malaysia and Thailand are also affected. In terms of financial sector, they are targeting Indonesia. Example are like banks. So they are highly targeted by ransomware operators. Okay, in terms of telecommunications, here it may refer to some of the internet service providers or ISP of the companies. So these sectors are, essential and crucial to the economy, and the threat actors are considering the issues, faced by the potential target to become lucrative targets. In short, they guarantee a payout from the victims. All right, so my last two slides is about spotlight of the two major ransomware family, Conti and Lockbit 2.0. We recently published it. You can refer to trendmicro.com. Basically, as we know, Conti has been increasing this January. So we documented the highlights of Conti. You may refer to Trend Micro blog site. It's important to understand, the different malware tools and exploits used by the threat actor group, because that's the way they need to deploy the ransomware. And of course, the security teams can watch out for the presence of, as you can see here, we have the matrix of the tactics, techniques, and procedures of the TTPs of the Conti. So the initial entry, commonly phishing, is widespread, and exploiting software as well. If you remember, when we had the work from home setup, we needed a VPN. And then some VPN has some vulnerability and got infected, even in Asia region. So ransomware operators deal with other malware, and yeah, they included it as part of their execution, like malware like Bazaar Loader and Cobalt Strike. So the next phase of discovery lets them, scan the entire network using tools like AdFind, NetLogon, and of course, the privilege escalation through some command lines. So yeah, it let the attackers to harvest the passwords with the use of tools like ProcDump and Mimikatz, and they can move laterally to the internal system or network, and with the use of tools like PSExec and Cobalt Strike. And the detection evasion adds some infliction, as they also has the capability to terminate processes like antiviruses. So it's very crucial. If your antivirus is off, no wonder you will be infected by the ransomware. So from this point, they can exfiltrate the data and send it back to CNC server, and finally they can execute the ransomware. All right, the Lockbit in this case is one of the most active ransomware operations with strong affiliation and program. So financial is the top affected sector according to their leak site. And in terms of victim in Asia Pacific, they had 8 successful victim companies. While in Trend Microtelemetry data, it reveals several detections, which could indicate that prevention of the infection. If you want to know more, you can go to trendmicro.com for exploits, different attack bases, TTPs, indicator of compromise, history of Lockbit, and historical, the technical details. Okay, for the recap, let's have a recap. Okay, ransomware detections in Asia was 82% in 2020. And in 2021, we got 3.7 million of detections in ASEAN region only. It included the targeted ransomware. Then for the Conti, it's surging this year, and maybe because the rebels arrest, so they switched to Conti. The Hive ransomware is affecting healthcare, the hospital in Thailand. The steadiness of the Lockbit 2.0 and Nephilim surpasses the Sodinokibi, the Revil. So yeah, in terms of targets product segment, enterprise 62.9%, but SMB are also at risk. The top sectors, manufacturing, healthcare, and financial and government, should be placing their security well. Okay, lastly is the two spotlight the ransomware families. So for Lockbit, as I have mentioned earlier, they have strong selling point of malware because they are actually they what do you call this? they introduce themselves as the fastest in terms of encryption methodology. So that's their selling point. And also they hire professional, actors like already involved in different ransomware as a service. So it's very dangerous. And also the attackers are targeting the geopolitical issue, let's say breaching the GDPR, the US data privacy law, ensuring that they have the successful payout from the victims. So yeah, the success of Lockbit, is because of that. And for that, we need to look out for Lockbit and for the other ransomware families. So I think, yeah, so just for the references here, and I think that's all for my threat landscape presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for sharing with us very important and new information, I think, to the public as well, introducing us to the notorious ransoms that we should be looking out for. And it is shocking how much, countries are under threat of ransomware everywhere, really. And of course, thank you for reminding us to keep our antivirus on so that we are protected to some level. And it may sound a little bit like things you see in a movie almost, but this is, let me remind you again, it's happening in real life, and it is very important that we are aware and we know how to prevent ourselves. So as we now learned that cybercrime continues to grow in the Asia Pacific region and probably all over the world as well, and it is quickly evolving as well from emerging threat to now a criminal enterprise. So before we begin to the panel discussion, the UNODC's RansomAware campaign has launched an introduction video to the general public to familiarize themselves with the concept of ransomware, to raise awareness and to introduce basic prevention to ransomware. So let us have a look at that master video.
You log into your email as usual and click on a link, only to have your screen locked before a pop-up message appears demanding a ransom to be paid in cryptocurrency. This is a stressful test for any user. Ransomware. What is ransomware? Ransomware is a type of malicious software that infects a device and then locks or encrypts its electronic files and holds them for ransom. Often, all it takes to get infected is to click on an innocent-looking link. According to a recent study, the Asia-Pacific region is 1.7 times more likely than the rest of the world to experience ransomware attacks. And the damage caused by ransomware attacks is not cheap. By the end of the second quarter of 2020, the average ransomware bailout for all Southeast Asian businesses was more than $178,000 per attack. Larger companies with more sophisticated networks are usually forced to spend even more. These numbers will continue to skyrocket as more and more organizations shift to online operations in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. Because of the increasingly sophisticated tools and methods used, cybercriminals are becoming bolder and more ambitious. Ransomware attacks often have threatening messages such as, "Pay before the deadline or your files will be deleted," or "Pay to regain access to this device," or "Pay now or your personal information will be made public." When confronted with such frightening messages, many people simply choose to pay the ransom without taking into account the possibility that the cybercriminal may simply leave their device locked. Those who pay may even be targeted again. We can, however, all take steps to improve security and lower the risk of infection. Here are some steps you can take to protect yourself from ransomware. Always keep your software up to date. Have an up-to-date backup of your data on multiple devices. Choose a strong password. Avoid sharing personal information online, and think twice before clicking on a suspicious link. If you lead an organization, there are some industry-standard measures you can implement to protect your network. You can start by creating a basic incident response plan, buying cyber liability insurance, keeping your operating systems updated, installing apps from trusted sources only, enforcing strong password policies, and conducting cybersecurity training for your non-IT staff. Policies like these are put in place for a reason, so remember to enforce them company-wide and keep employees up to date. Ransomware has become incredibly widespread over the last few years. Numerous initiatives have been implemented by governmental, non-governmental, and intergovernmental agencies to promote cybersecurity awareness. This is an anti-ransomware campaign by the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime Global Program on Cybercrime, intended to inform both member states and the public about ransomware prevention. Designed for maximum flexibility, it also helps developing countries identify and prevent cybercrime in a holistic manner. UNODC works with governments in the Asia-Pacific region to provide technical assistance and help member states in the investigation, prosecution, and adjudication of cybercrime. This assistance has included the design and delivery of multifaceted response training courses on ransomware, cryptocurrencies, and darknet investigations. Facilitation of cross-regional cooperation to share, discuss, and address challenges through the working group meetings. Awareness campaigns as a preventative measure empowering communities to understand the risks posed by ransomware. To learn more about ransomware prevention, please visit the UNODC website. Ransomware is a serious threat that can infect any device. However, by maintaining basic cyber hygiene, you can help prevent ransomware attacks. Everyone can do their part in preventing ransomware.
Coming up next, we have very interesting discussion from experts in the field from several countries joining us today to share their insights and experiences in ransomware. From the government sector today, the panelists are Group Captain Aman Chomshoy, Deputy Secretary General of Thailand's National Cybersecurity Agency, and Mr. Sigit Kurniawan, Deputy Director on Securities Strategy on Cyber and Crypto from Indonesia's National Cyber Crypto Agency. And lastly, I'm Jeneline Macalinao, Policy Lead from the Philippines Department of Information and Communications Technology. So please welcome the three of them today. So for the first session, we will start with Mr. Aman from Thailand's National Cybersecurity Agency. So I have two questions for you, Mr. Aman. So what are the potential damages to governments caused by ransomware? And how does the COVID-19 pandemic accelerate the damages?
Like Trend Micro presentation, a lot of government organizations, especially in public health sectors, such as hospitals, have been hit by ransomware gang. Okay, and the effect that it has could be worse. For example, a lot of hospitals right now are depending on IT and cyber system to provide healthcare services to patients. Okay, for example, all the healthcare records are kept under IT system, and also most importantly, the medical, the information how you are allergic to which type of medicine, which is extremely important. That's why we are quite concerned regarding ransomware attack on public healthcare system. So far, there's no better word. We are quite lucky that none of it have the worst. None of the worst have happened yet. But we try to raise the awareness for the hospital and public healthcare system to be better protected in their operations, in their equipment, and also for the internet connection. Okay. And the situation is worsened by COVID-19 because of COVID-19. It forces us to work from home, or right now we call it work from anywhere. It means that everyone have to take their computer or their notebooks home and connect remotely to government agencies on the area that or the agency they're working on. It means that quite a few government agencies have to open up the remote connection to their workers. Okay. and quite a few in public sector, they are not quite prepared to have secure remote connection. Okay, for example, virtual private network, the one that you connect back to your office from your phone. Right now, quite a few, they don't use multi-factor authentication. They only rely on username and password, which quite a few, the password could easily be guessed. And so the remote connection that people use to work from home is one of the weak points for the attack. Okay, as you've seen from Trend Micro presentation. And also, when people take their notebooks from the office to their home, sometimes they couldn't provide the same protection like when they are in the office. For example, there might be a risk of installation of malware, or also some, even unapproved software to that system. And that could invite the hacker into that system as well. And when they take it back to the office, the machine will come pre-packaged with malware. So instead of keep it in the office and firewall, antivirus, IDS, IPS can protect them, they take it back to their home and they use it without protection. And sometimes they bring in the malware within the system that we have seen it since the COVID-19 forced us to work from home. Okay, and also what we're doing in trying to provide better protection. The first is the public awareness, like what we are doing right now. And we saw that is the first step to counter the attack from ransomware gang. Okay, people need to be aware on how to protect themselves. Okay, not just the government organization, but security, cybersecurity is the responsibility for everyone. Anyone that get their hands on notebook, mobile phone, or PC need to know that they could become a victim. They could bring in the infection of malware into their own organization and cause problems. So besides trying to strengthen cybersecurity posture for the government organization, we also have to raise the public awareness in terms of ransomware prevention. Okay? Because right now, only before that we just emphasize on update and backups. But right now, that's not enough. We need to prepare to recover not just the recovered data, but also recover the reputation. And to recover the reputation is very difficult. And also, when the government organization leak citizen personal identifiable information, it could lead to another a lot of cases of cybercrimes as well, because cyber criminal can use the PAI as the attack vector. For example, right now we have a lot of incidents regarding call center attack. People use just the phone to call in someone as that saying that you are involved with some illegal activity. So to settle this, you need to transfer money. And a lot of this happen because of information leakage, and those information leakers are involved with the PAI of our citizens. Okay, so we have to educate on two sides. Not just the government have to better themselves in terms of cybersecurity, but also we need to do cyber vaccination for our citizens as well, so that they could not easily be fooled by criminal gang with term of SMS phishing or email phishing, or even call up and try to use the scare tactic or using greed to lure in people in clicking on something and lead to society and public sector. Thank you.
So yeah, like Kunamon said, it is very important that we start from the foundation of creating awareness to protect the medical workers and protect ourselves as well as patients with medical histories and information that we do not want to be leaked to the public. And thank you so much for introducing us to the term cyber vaccination. I think that is appropriate for what we need right now. So not only vaccinating ourselves from the pandemic, from the virus, but from the ransomware as well. Thank you very much, Kunamon. So I'm going to move on to Mr. Sigit now from Indonesia. Mr. Sigit, I'm just going to ask you the same questions as Kunamon. So what are the potential damages to the government sector caused by ransomware, and how does COVID-19 make it worse? And what are the steps that the government has taken to raise awareness about ransomware? Thank you.
Our vision to Dr. Sultyo, because we have another schedule at this time. Introduce myself, my name is Sigit, as Deputy Director at Strategy and Cybersecurity Cryptography. Thank you. Today I will our experience and effort made by the government of Indonesia, in this case BSSN, that is facing the increase of ransomware attack. As you may have known, malware is currently something that needs to be watched out for, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. This is because malware is increasing and causing disruption to the government, business sector, and the community. Based on the data compiled by BSSN, malware account for 62 to 0.27% of our traffic anomalies in Indonesia during 2021, followed by Trojan activity with as much as 9.61%. The number of sets used on the spread of malware is almost X million. In 2021, in Indonesia, the 5 biggest ransomware activities were Loki and WannaCry, followed by Toddlers and Reef ransomware, and the last is Bad Rabbit. Meanwhile, the industries that suffer the most are financial services and oil and gas, followed by transportation industry. Ransomware attacks are conducted by stealing data and sharing it to dark web forum, and also demanding a sum of money as a ransom to decrypt file encrypted by ransomware. For as an example, as you know, the Central Bank of Indonesia was attacked by the Conti ransomware. Some data was stolen and sold on the dark web forum, even though it was confirmed that that stolen data was not an important data. Unfortunately, Central Bank of Indonesia CSIRT team had carried out the procedure accordingly, and thus preventing the ransomware to spread widely. Coordination has also been carried out with BSSN to ensure that the best steps has been taken to minimize the impact and conduct a more detailed investigation. The next step is to evaluate the security procedure applied to avoid similar incidents from happening in the future. So this is to anticipate against malware attack by government. So BSN has come to the foster stakeholders using three strategies, namely preventive strategy, proactive and reactive strategy, and in the last, the trend strategy. For the preventive strategy, several things we are carrying out, including first, conducting capability building and training on malware analysis. Capacity building and training is held regularly with various case scenarios by experts in the field of malware analysis, especially ransomware analysis. Second, encouraging stakeholders to conduct assessment of cybersecurity governance and security testing periodically on critical electronic system. This is to ensure the security of the electronic system is well. So third, optimizing cyber risk management. Cyber risk should have become the focus in the cyber security today. There are still many who think that IT is enough, but it's not quite right, because by carrying out cyber risk, we can map out potential threat and cyber vulnerabilities more precisely so as to minimize cyber incident, which in the end the control also in accordance with the vulnerabilities that occur. The fourth, enhancing cybersecurity literacy and cybersecurity exercise. This is to increase awareness of information security related to the latest cyber threats so that they can be anticipated and understood by stakeholders. In addition, this activity can improve the ability to handle cyber attack with various methods such as cyber retest, cyber exercise, incident simulation, and others. And for proactive and reactive strategy, several things we are carried out, including first, establishing incident response team, namely by forming a massive CSIRT or cyber security incident response team to facilitate coordination when cyber incident occur. With the CSIRT team, it is possible to simplify incident response procedures. And the second, notifying and reporting to stakeholder if an incident occur. By notifying and reporting cyber incident, it is expected that incident do not spread to other industries, and thus industries are more vigilant and anticipating the ransomware attack. And the last strategy, the threat strategy, several things were carried out, including first, further improving coordination and collaboration with stakeholders. Synergy needs to be well established between the regulator and the industry. To create a favorable cybersecurity ecosystem, Indonesia is currently developing a national cybersecurity strategy. This discuss all stakeholders, including regulators, industry, academia, and also the community are in the part in charge of the national cybersecurity. And the second, increasing knowledge sharing between stakeholders by providing experience in handling incident, especially handling malware that has occurred. This is done in the form of a limited forum involving the same industry sector, in this case involving association. This is the last slide. BSN continues to provide information security awareness, which is published in the form of material and security advisory. The material provided is always updated against the latest cybersecurity threats. The material can be seen on BSN website and social media of BSN. In addition to cybersecurity literacy activities, which are regularly given at various events. The material is made in a simple and attractive manner so that it is easy for the public to understand. Thank you. I offer to you, Rafi.
So it is important, again, to say awareness, right, is probably one of the most important foundation among the public and other agencies as well, to be aware. And then the training and the education as well is a good strategy to deal with this. Thank you very much, Mr. Sikit. Now we're going to move on to the Philippines. We have Ms. Janeline Macalina from the Philippines Policy Lead of Department of Information and Communications Technology. Thank you for joining us. So, similar questions, Janeline. So, what are the potential damages to the government caused by ransomware, and how COVID-19 makes it worse, and what are the steps that have been taken to prevent ransomware? Thank you.
I will be giving a brief background on the experience of the Philippines when it comes to the threat of ransomware. So for the threat landscape, this was from a report by Interpol. The report is entitled ASEAN Cyber Threat Assessment 2021. And according to the report, there were 137,366 ransomware detections in the Philippines from January to September of the year 2020. In another report, this time from cybersecurity firm Sophos, entitled State of Ransomware 2021, the report shows that ransomware attacks cost Philippine firms an average of 820,000 US dollars on the average in the year 2020. Uh, However, good thing still that this is lower than the global average of 1.85 million US dollars. Ransomware attacks, the report also showed that ransomware attacks in the country increased by 12%. 42% of the firms surveyed in the country reported they were hit by ransomware in 2020. Uh, Unfortunately, this is higher than the global average of 37%. Good thing though that the same report shows that among the 30 countries in the studies, it shows that the Philippines is prepared for 100% of response, having a full and detailed malware incident recovery plan. So, with all these figures, how is the Philippine government addressing this threat? Allow me to share what the government is doing. For one, all our initiatives against malware is based on the National Cybersecurity Strategy Roadmap, which is the National Cybersecurity Plan 2022. This was issued by the Department of Information and Communications Technology back in 2017. So this refers to a comprehensive plan of action designed to improve the security and enhance cyber resilience of Philippine infrastructures and services, and is basically a top-down approach to cybersecurity that contains broad policy statements and establishes a set of national objectives and priorities that should be achieved within a specific time frame. So, 5 months after the issuance of the National Cybersecurity Plan, the Department of ICT issued these 3 circulars for the implementation. First is the Memorandum Circular 05, which prescribes the policies and regulations on the protection of critical infrastructures. It was the DICT also issued MC06. This one prescribes the policies and the regulations on the protection of government agencies. And simultaneously, the DICT also issued MC07, prescribing the policies and regulations on the protection of individuals as stipulated in the National Cybersecurity Plan. And more recently, the department issued DC03, serving as a supplement to the earlier issued MC05 up to 07, and also DC06, which provided the guidelines on the application and issuance of digital certificates. This covers digital signatures in light of the pandemic, so that government transactions would continue and other services provided by the government would not be hampered. So what is the relevance of these policies when it comes to addressing ransomware? In DICT MC05, Section 4 mandates the implementation of the Philippine National Standard on Information Security Management System, or ISO IEC 27001, and this is for mandatory compliance by all CII operators. And so what does it do in fighting malwares or ransomwares? If we take a look at ISO 27001, it basically addresses ransomware in such a way that you take a look at the risk assessment. Because ISO 27001 requires that you formally document the scope of your ISMS if you think of it this way, what information are you protecting, when, where, and why? During the ISMS scoping phase, you identify the data that the ISO 27001 ISMS is intended to protect. Let's say, for example, for a hospital system, we would expect that the personal health information and credit card information would minimally form the basis of the information in scope when you scope the data that you want to protect. So during scoping, it is critical to understand the processes that act on the data, like patient intake, financial screening, vitals, patient history, pharmacy, etc. And the assets that support those processes, like tablets, medical equipment, applications, networks, etc. So understanding scoping is critically important to understanding risk. If you don't know what information you are protecting and into what context, you cannot understand risk. Like, for example, the threats to the data and the vulnerabilities that those threats would attempt to exploit. So performing a comprehensive risk assessment is the basis of this standard, ISO 27001. During the risk assessment, malwares, including ransomware, would have been identified as a threat. Ransomware exploits vulnerabilities in user knowledge of the threats, like improperly configured systems, operating systems, browsers. The impact of ransomware is exacerbated actually by a lack of recent unaffected data backups for the encrypted data. So in the process of adapting these standards, during the development of the risk treatment plan, the definitive list of controls that need to put in place to reduce all risks to an acceptable level. The proper extent of ISO 27001 controls necessary to mitigate ransomware attacks would have been identified. So probably they would have included security awareness training, admin access on desktops, antivirus, intrusion prevention systems, vulnerability and configuration management, data backups, and so on. So that's the purpose of having minimum information security standards in place as a policy for critical infrastructures. Section 4B of the circular requires all CIIs also to participate in the conduct of risk and vulnerability assessment by the Department of ICT at least once a year. And Section 4H requires all CIIs to prepare disaster and recovery and business continuity plan as part of their ICT systems. Now for DC-03 or Department Circular 03, Section 8 mandates all government agencies and instrumentalities to ensure the integrity and security of their respective systems to withstand an annual VAPT that is conducted by the Philippine National CERT, which the official name is CERT-PH. And then Section 9 requires all CIIs to participate in the conduct of risk and vulnerability assessment by the DICT at least once a year or as may be determined by the ICT. And lastly, this would be my last slide. For information sharing, the Philippine National CERT-PH sends out daily cybersecurity threat feeds with recommendations on addressing the threats, including ransomware threats. So these are sent out daily to the email addresses of those that are subscribed to the Philippine National CERT cybersecurity threat feeds. And these are composed mostly of critical infrastructure operators. And then CERT-PH also regularly posts security advisories on its website and also on its social media pages. So that's about it. I hope I was able to share the experiences of the Philippine government when it comes to ransomware. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Janlene. So we have a few more Q&A discussion among the panelists. So I think I'm going to stay with Janlene for the first questions. So talking about identifying what are the risks, may I ask you who is at risk in the Philippines? Like who is at risk of ransomware attack?
Yes, actually, we've been seeing a lot to that our critical infrastructures are facing. So that is why we hold regular roundtable discussions with each of the sectors. We have identified 10 CII sectors for now in the country, and we meet the sector at least once a year, and this is different from our scheduled meetings with the sectoral CERT leads. So the structure is that we do have a Philippine national CERT, but there is also sectoral CERT leads for the CII sectors, because we understand that threats are unique to each sector. Like for the transportation, it's very different from the threats faced by the healthcare sector. So yeah, all CIIs face the same risk of these ransomware threats.
All right, thank you very much. Now moving on to Sigit, may I? So how does the COVID-19 pandemic, make or impose even more challenges to like the high number already of ransomware in your country? How has the COVID-19 make it worse?
Oh yeah, pandemic COVID-19 is very can you hear my voice, please? Okay. So sorry, COVID-19 is very influenced about cyber attack in Indonesia, of course, because as all the activity almost work online, like work from home, school from home, and shopping from anywhere. So from digitalization is increased, so the threat for cyber attack is also increased too, because in cyber attack is targeted by target to people who security hours is minimum. So as as my previous slide, in Indonesia, malware is almost X million. So ransomware is part of malware target to financial and so government. So in this situation, pandemic, we must care about the ransomware attack. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Sigit. So I'm gonna next question addressed to Mr. Amon from Thailand now. So earlier you mentioned that updating or backupping is no longer enough anymore to protect malware from entering the system, right? So what are the other prevention methods that you have introduced to the maybe healthcare sector and individuals as well?
Okay, I would like to keep my recommendation short and concise. Remember, everything that's connected on the internet must be secure. Okay. For example, in some of the cases that we found, the entry point is one of the website that's was developed a long time ago, and people forgot all about it. And that website was shared by the other website. So the weak website could lead to the problem that hacker can get into and gather up all the information about inside system, and they use it as a way to get to the most important database. Okay? And also, a lot of people are using remote desktop protocol, using VNC or even TeamViewer. Anything that allow people to manage the system from outside the network must be secure as well. Okay, so everything that touches the internet, it doesn't matter if it's contained secret or not. You have to secure it. Okay, otherwise the hacker can use it to get into your network and cause you a lot of problems. Okay, another point I like to make is that if it's connected to the internet and it contains vulnerabilities, hackers have the way to get information. They can use website. It's called shodan.io, shodan.io, and search for the system that's not secure. Okay? That's why right now it's much easier for the hackers or ransomware gang to get into different networks. So the best advice is, if it's connected to the internet, make sure that all the systems are secure.
Thank you very much. Let me stay with you. One more question, Mr. Ramon, as this is related. So I think many people, general public, have heard many times before, if it's connected to internet, you have to take care of your personal data, don't connect everything. I think people have heard this already, but sometimes the practice doesn't seem to happen. So as a government agency, how do you encourage these people, general public, to be more aware?
Well, so I think one thing is that we have to emphasize more about the worst that could happen, because everyone would think that it will never happen to me, it will happen everywhere else. We have to raise the awareness that the next victim could be you. Okay? And one of the FBI, ex-FBI director, he said it that very nicely, that right now in the world there's two types of organization: the ones that got hacked and the one that will be hacked. Okay, that's the idea, that we need to increase the awareness for the public and also the government agency as well, that you need to be prepared. You need to be prepared, and you need to be to have some awareness that if you don't do it, you can catch the virus, and not just the COVID virus, but also some malware from the internet as well. So so you may say that what we need to change is not just the awareness, but culture. We need to have cybersecurity culture, so that next time the public or the people face the new challenges, the new way that the hacker will use, they have the way of thinking that maybe it's not such a good idea to click on this. Maybe it's not such a good idea to look onto this website because it could lead to problems. Or it's not such a good idea to reply to this email, to send out not just the hacking term, but also send out the your citizen ID or your bank account, or give away your password. Those kind of things need to be ingrained into cyber citizen in this day and age, to move step up from the awareness to the level of cybersecurity culture. Okay? And I think that's the way that we can live in this world. And also in the future, it's up and coming, it's metaverse. That would make life is even worse, because in the metaverse world, it will be much harder to detect the cyber criminal. So we need to raise the level of cybersecurity culture in people's mind right now, because only the technologies, if you rely on that, that's not enough anymore. Okay.
All right. Thank you very much, Kunamon. Indeed, thinking that next target could be you, I think that gives you some kind of alarm that actually I need to be careful more. And I think most people, more people than we think, are somewhat encountering like scams or ransomware in some way, maybe call scams like you mentioned, or maybe emails spam. So yeah, thank you very much for that encouraging message. Thank you. And last questions on the Q&A, I think I'm going to address to Jeneline, if that's okay with you. So you mentioned that by promoting awareness and creating education, you put the awareness messages or promoting campaign online, right? So I want to ask you, who are the main targets on the social media? Is it the young generation for them to be more aware, or for the older generation to be more aware of their activities online as a, cyber citizens?
For the general public, we do have specific posts for them posted on our social media page, specific to different sectors. Like there's one for children, there's one for businesses. We also have one for because we also have this program, parenting in the digital age. So we also have those kinds of materials. We try to be more as inclusive as possible, since this cyber threats affects all of us. And you're right, you mentioned the elderly. It's sad that there are also a high number of cyber crimes affecting also the elderly, since they're just, of course, they're not that tech savvy, so they are sometimes targeted. So we also create materials that would be easier for this group to understand. We try to include everyone, and of course we understand that even the children, they're also very vulnerable to all these threats, and so that's why we also have programs for the parents.
It is very important to know, what the governments are doing, what the damages that they're repairing, and what they plan to do for the general public to be more aware. And let me say again, more aware of the ransomware, which is affecting everybody. So let me go on a quick break for another 10 minutes, I believe, and we'll come back for more discussion from the private sector. Thank you very much, everybody, again. So as we now know from the earlier session, that ransomware attacks target anyone, not only just the government agencies who are at risk, private sectors, including organizations, businesses, large or small, individuals can also be vulnerable to the cybercrime too. So let me introduce our panelists from the private sector again, who will be sharing with us ransomware prevention and cybersecurity practices. So we have Paul Pajares, Senior Threat Researcher and a Liaison to Interpol. And we have Benjamin Shepherdson, a Director and Country Manager from the Malaysian International Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and Mary Jo Charade, Assistant General Counsel and Regional Lead from Microsoft Digital Crimes in Asia, Unit Asia. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. So let's dive into the questions for the second discussion of this webinar. So let's start with Paul. So Paul, why is it important for businesses to develop and implement cybersecurity practices, and how can both public and private corporations be enhanced in prevention of ransomware?
All right, so good afternoon again. Welcome back for me. For the question here, so the demand for the cybersecurity practices, has intensified due to the strategic and innovative ways of threat actors into infiltrating the system, or basically breaching some of the high-profile companies. However, the questions still linger. on why cyber threats are still increasing despite of the efforts of the IT security making place the security controls effectively. Well, at some maybe it's not effective. Here we will discuss on why cyber security practices is important for businesses to develop and implement it. So excuse me. So nowadays, most of the businesses are digitized, and rarely we see businesses that are non-digital. So even traditional business, they accept digital payments. So a vast part of economy is through digitalization. And since it is very common, so the risk of cyber threat becomes common as well. So the business should treat the cyber threat risk as one of their business risk. So just like spoilage, loss, or fire incident, something like that. So in the coming series of slides, I will gonna talk about ransomware impact, the cyber risk index study, and the gaps between the business leader and IT leader, wherein this friction exposes them to the cyber threats or hurt their business. All right, so ransomware impact. So companies understand the implications of ransomware, but are they ready when it happens? So the problem is with double extortion, or we call the modern ransomware, the encryption of the data and the leakage of the data is combined if the ransomware payment demand is not met. So it pressurizes the company because even they have the cyber insurance, their asset is at risk of being divulged, and their business service is also being affected. And another concern is actually the personal identifiable information, or PII, of the customers, depending on the region. For example, in Europe, the GDPR could fine the company, and the customers can also take a legal action. So the brand or reputation of the company is, can be tarnished in case of ransomware infection. Threat actors have capability of doing more, such as launching distribute denial of service. So from there, we coined the term triple extortion. And then the threat actors can also contact the customers of the victim companies, saying that they have also the data of there from the company, so that they need to pay as well. So in this case, it's important for the companies to exercise the best cybersecurity, which will I be mentioning later on. All right, so cyber risk index. So Trend Micro teamed up with the Ponemon Institute to investigate the level of cyber risk across organizations and create a cyber risk index. So refreshed regularly, the CRI is a comprehensive measure of measuring the gap between the organization's current security posture and its likelihood of being attacked. So the latest round added the Latin America, in addition to North America, Europe, and Asia Pacific. But in this case, all right, the lower the CRI means the higher risk. So the three regions accumulated to negative 0.42 CRI. So those three regions are at global high elevated risk. And yeah. So for the different risk, I will just run through quickly. So data risk is when the IT is unable to prevent or detect the cyber attacks, even the zero-day attacks. So for data types like business email, financial information, analytics, consumer data, and let's say the company confidential information are at risk. Now for operational risk, it refers to lacking of security in DevOps environment. So negative consequences are like customer turnover, loss of intellectual property, disruption or damage to the infrastructure, or cost of the consultants, experts, and of course the loss of revenue. Now for human capital risk, it refers to the IT leader that does not have sufficient authority and resources to achieve strong security posture. In short, some C-level organization view the IT security as not business priority. Infrastructure risk, basically protecting data assets and IT infrastructure, does not have ability to know where the physical location of the business critical data assets are. Lastly is, of course, the cyber risk, where the ransomware is part of the top 5 cyber threats, including man-in-the-middle attack, fileless attack, botnets, phishing, and social engineering. We surveyed about 1,145 North American, 885 European, 845 Asia Pacific, and 802 Latin America for IT security professionals from a wide range of industries and company sizes. So here's what we found. Overall, the North American risk increased from the previous results and was the highest, with Asian Pacific and Europe being the next highest risk, and the Latin America having the lowest risk. So 3 of the 4 regions are at an elevated high risk level. 86% of the respondents expect to be breached in the next 12 months, according to the survey, exposing a critical gap in breach detection capabilities. And for the top 4 data types at highest risk of loss or theft across the world are the financial information, the business communication, consumer data, and analytics like the data models. So all of which could dramatically affect the health of the organization. Okay, more statistics, but just to give you highlights, the friction between the business leader and the IT leader exposes the organization to cyber threat. So we have partnered with Sapio Research about this study. The references will be shown later, so you can refer to it. So, okay. FBI said that they had 4 billion of losses based from the data breaches. So because threat actors moved quickly to exploit, the digital transformation, of course, due to pandemic. And it's no surprise that 150% of ransomware is surging year on year. In our trend microtelemetry data, as you can see, first half of 2021 is almost coming up the same with the 2020 detections. So that's overall threat detection. So from the survey, 5,321 IT decision makers from 26 countries, we surveyed about the gap between the business leader and IT leader. So about 49% claims that the cyber risk is an IT problem rather than a business risk. So that's crucial. And then 90% of the IT decision makers are willing to compromise cybersecurity. So in fact, 50% of IT leaders believe that the C-suite completely understands cyber risks. Now, the low C-suite engagement combined with the increased investment suggests that there's a tendency to throw money at the problem rather than develop an understanding of the cybersecurity challenges and for investing appropriately. So it is clear that there is a gap between business leader and IT leaders in terms of security. Now I'll just go through on some of the cybersecurity practices. So basically audit and inventory, to know the accountability, to know the the assets, the gem of the company should be protected. Configure and monitor the security design, of course. The least privilege principle, where the access rights should be reviewed, and patch and update is very important. When there's a vulnerability, threat actors will take advantage of it to deploy, let's say, ransomware. Protect and recover. So what happens after the ransomware? So better if the company has tightened their disaster and recovery planning, and of course, enforce multi-factor authentication. Secure and defend, of course, layered of securities. There should be the environment like an email, endpoint, web, and network. Those should be protected. AI and machine learning is just a plus. Last is the most important one, train and test. All right. So regular security awareness training is a must. And, the security team should conducting a red team exercise. Basically, they can also refer to the tactics, techniques, and procedures, or the TTPs matrix that the cybersecurity is providing for specific malware. And also, penetration testing is important. And yeah, from that, they can able to focus and determine the effectiveness of their cybersecurity program. Okay, for my second to the last slide, I think this is for the second question regarding the public and private partnership. Well, as being a liaison to Interpol, we recently joined the Interpol activity on taking down two recent ransomware crackdown last year. So first is the Club Ransomware, dismantling the cybercrime ring by arresting 6 suspected members and confiscating, the assets, including tracing the crypto wallets. So Trend Micro provided intelligence and indicator of compromise for the span of 2 years. So I've been there. So, and then I think it helped, at some point. And then Gantt Crab on the second one, which is affiliated to Revil, we were able to share some data sets as well and intelligence. So the disruption of these big ransomware operators are exceptional to pressure the threat actors. Now, for the strong alliance with law enforcement, it can enable the global coordinated efforts, but it depends on the several aspects of activities, such as, let's say, how we enrich the information sharing, in order to move forward and take a lead. Attribution is quite burdensome. However, other actions like taking down the servers or tracing the money trail can also prevent the prolific business of ransomware. So the positive thing about investigation is, the discovery of the weaknesses of the threat actors. We can, let's say, identify the backend IP address of the ransomware group because they're using Tor sites, like anonymous site. As mentioned, the cryptocurrency plays a vital role as well in determining the end goal of the ransomware, where the payment goes. So basically, we have found out some of the financial team of ransomware group, they just park the ransom payment that they have got, or sometimes they do a tumbling, or they cash out using crypto traders like Binance. So it is very important. Well, they do that because they want to evade the law enforcement. So it's important, of course, the investigation for the crypto wallets as well. The mindset of the attackers in ransomware changes over time. So their tactics and techniques remain the same, but because of different modern ransomware, we have to look on different intrusion sets, threat actors, ransomware. Just simply simply tracing back to why the victim got infected. So small pieces of information can be very helpful and a good starting point of investigation. And from there, we can delve into, let's say, underground, monitor their chats, their announcements, because they have a strong affiliation and programs regarding that. So in this one, of course, exercising security awareness is very important as well because human is the weakest link. Okay, last slide. Here, we reveal about the gulf between risk profiles of the organization leadership and the IT. So in this study, we have figures or statistics, but just to share with you the summary, in terms of risk responsibility, both are held accountable. In risky business, for business leader, they focus on workforce transformation, but for IT, they focus on cybersecurity. Cyber risk confidence and risk behaviors also don't complement, as you can see here. So this can lead to open to cyber threats. Therefore, it is vital for these two to be on the same page. So for the references, you can go on this link to what this study, and I think that's all for my answer.
ransomware is it's business risk, right? It's something that they need to be addressed, and all teams have to work together. So thank you very much for that. And I think for me personally, it's very interesting to know that it's not just double extortion anymore, and it's now like triple extortion. So make businesses even more at risk. And now, also learning from you, Paul. Thank you very much. That like ransomware is not traditional anymore. I think it's advancing. Like yeah, like the threat is not on traditional currency anymore. Now that cryptocurrency is entrenched, people are now kind of attacking that currency as well. So yeah, thank you very much for your information, and of course, the importance of training and testing and assessing, identifying everything. Thank you very much, Paul. All right, let me now move on to another panelist, Benjamin Shepherdson.
Thank you, Pitrapi, for the introduction. Now, welcome everyone. My name is Benjamin Shepherdson, and today I'm going to share with you a bit on the topic of a public-private sector partnership to address ransomware. And today I'll be touching a bit on enhancing cybersecurity practices through privacy and data protection initiatives, right? So my earlier presenter, Paul, has shared a lot about the cybersecurity, a lot about the ransomware threat. Now I'm going to take you on a different lens, right? Now here we're going to talk more on the privacy and data protection aspect of it, right? And in this case, we're going to look at, I'm just going to cover a bit on privacy versus security. I'm going to cover a bit about trends. And we've seen the risk, third-party risk has gone or has exposed a lot of organizations to data breach and also security incidents. I'm going to touch a bit about competency of a DPO. A DPO is a data protection officer and InfoSec personnel, right? And this will address the second question on what the public and private organizations can do. And the last part of it is, despite all the risk out there, I'm just going to give you practical steps or practical measures for you to look into your organization and perhaps see what are the tips that will be able to help you, right? So now, when we look into the security part of it, it's all about governing the unauthorized access, right? We look into the security perimeter. We don't want people to come into this into the organization. But when we talk about privacy, it's all about how information, right? If we take a higher level information, it could be any information, financial information, business information. But in this case, we'll take a personal data or personal information flowing through an organization, right? Now, like it or not, personal information will have to now personal information is the key aspect of business. Right? In today's world, big data or data analytics, data management has been the core of every business, right? Now, if you don't have information, if you don't process personal information, then probably you might be in the wrong industry, right? And personal information, it's huge out there. If you look at the likes of Google, Facebook, right? And on top of that, with the COVID-19, now organizations are actually processing much more information and probably than they could actually do it, right? So in short, the privacy or data protection governs how a group of people can actually use those kind of information and use it wisely, right? Which is where the privacy and the security part of it overlays each other, right? You can't have privacy without security, right? And to give you a quick idea on data protection rules, right? So data protection rules is large globally, right? And if you are hit by a cybersecurity attack, likely if there is a data breach, right? The impact is huge to an organization, right? That's why we see regulations like GDPR imposes fines of up to 4% of the company's global revenue. So it could run into hundreds and millions of dollars in terms of fine, right? That's just fine, let alone you got to put up your recovery costs, right? Your whole crisis management costs. I mean, that's going to be huge as well. And on top of that, you're going to look into your brand, your company reputational impact to the organization, right? So in short, when we look at privacy, there are actually rules when you go through the information life cycle, right? Every organization collects information, collects personal data. Every organization processes personal data. You store personal data. And when a data breach happens, it's where the storage has been compromised or the access of it has been compromised, right? And under the disclosure and transfer, there are rules that organization will have to follow in order to comply with the regulation, right? And we've seen over the past years, right, COVID hasn't been really good to us, and it has caused a lot of organizations to go into a digital transformation. But what we fail to realize, these are the important key things that we've actually predicted in 2022. There will be a spike in phishing scams. There will be increased spamming activities, and there will be more phishing and identity theft involving technologies such as deepfake, right? So here's the question: if you, an organization whose main core business is reliant on personal information, all right, and if you are being held ransom, right, and if you don't have enough security measure in place, then and if the hacker probably just wants money out from your organization, then it's fair, right? But what if the hacker who has a bigger intention of exposing your information, or even a criminal intention of using those identity and creating using it for criminal activities, right? So that's not a very good outcome of that. So I'm going to share with you some of the things that has happened over a couple of years, right? Now, if you look at a neighboring country in Singapore, right? Although some of the data breach, none of the data were lost by the companies, right? But when we look from a data protection perspective, the regulators do issue out fines for the negligence or poor cybersecurity practices, right? So although in certain locations or in certain jurisdictions, the cybersecurity act, cybersecurity regulation doesn't cover a majority of the industry, unlike the financial or the healthcare, which is governed by which is heavily governed by the cybersecurity act. But there are some industries who are not, right? Let's say, example, the small and medium enterprise, your small brick and mortar shop that that potentially collects personal data through their e-commerce platform, right? So although non-compliance to the data protection law could actually fetch you fines of, in Singapore, could be up to 1 million. In Malaysia, it could be up to 500,000 ringgit. And in Malaysia and the Philippines, it's actually considered a criminal offense. So you could potentially end up in jail, right? So although no data were lost, there were fines issued by the regulators because there were lapses in security practices, right? Now, on the other case where we look at the ransomware attack on AXA, right? So although the point here is it's all sophisticated, right? And I guess if you talk to Paul will be able to give you a bit more in depth on how sophisticated it can be. But in short, we cannot achieve data protection or privacy, right, without good cybersecurity, right? But and at the same time, the privacy data protection initiatives help organizations enhance some of the practices of current cybersecurity practices in an organization, right? And I talked about third party earlier. So we've seen companies like SolarWinds, right? And how third party has actually impacted them as global platforms were affected, as this was a common network management system used in big data centers, right? And if we looked at it, some of the telcos were affected where their customer information were breached, right? Now, closer here in Singapore, a system of a telco company was breached, and the telco had to pay a fine to the regulators, and in compensation and customer assurance, they offer an identity theft monitoring service at their cost, right? So it's not only the regulators you got to deal with, but also at the end customers' point that you've got to also assist them in handling the breach, right? So here's some of the points that we've actually taken into account looking at third-party risk management in 2022, right? Now, looking into data protection regulations around ASEAN region and also globally, we've seen a lot of the data protection regulation actually impose obligations on third party to ensure that that they have security and also retention practices in place. Right, there are frameworks that they will need to comply with as part of an organization's effort to engage third parties. Right, and we look at the increased frequency and the hacks of it. Right, we know now everything is transacted online, and there's always a risk of a man-in-the-middle attack, right? And work from home doesn't help any further, right? Even a simple update of your Google Chrome, right? So there's an update, right? So if the users or the employees or any individual fail to update those the application, then they are actually exposing themselves to the security vulnerabilities out there, right? So to give you an idea why data breach and privacy happens, right? I'm breaking down into 3 scenarios. Right? So the first scenario is the organization has failed to identify the risk, right? Now, if either we look at the cybersecurity risk, if you're looking at a personal data or privacy risk, then there is a failure to identify those risks, right? Now, in the second scenario, we've identified the risk, but we've actually failed to implement the controls, right? And now the third part of it, which if the organization has identified the risk, has implemented the controls, and yet it happened, right? So, this could be one of the unlucky days the organization is going through, or maybe one of the unlucky days the employee of the organization decides to do something stupid in the organization, right? And coming through that, on the third one, you've identified the risk, you implement it, and yet it happened, right? So this situation actually helps or could be a mitigating factor when it comes to the regulators dishing out the fines to the organization. All right. And in order for you to know what are the things that the regulators are looking at, I'm happy to share some of the 5 questions regulators ask in terms of showing accountability, right? So for us, I've worked with quite a bit of the data protection regulators in this region. And here's what they, in a way, agree to, right? So they want to know what risk assessment has the organization has done, right? In order to identify the risks, the gaps in the organization, and what policies and SOPs do they have, right? Now, if there's no policies in place, there's no way that the employees or the organization has control in terms of complying to the regulation. What percentage of the organization has been trained, right? Now, this comes back to the earlier session with Kun Amron, right, where he mentioned about the cyber vaccination, right? People need to know what can be done and what cannot be done in relation to comply with the regulation. And then the next one is, how has the organization maintained the level of awareness of data protection and competency in the organization, right? And has there been any incident happened before, right? And like what in relation to a ransomware attack, right? If there were smaller incidents relating to security breaches, right? That actually shows that the organization, that the security portion of the organization is somehow vulnerable. And if it's not being addressed, then it could actually explode into a bigger situation, right? So if you have your database being intrude and there wasn't anything done, then likely something big would happen, right? And regulators, to address the second question, right? Regulators or the public are actually looking into standard-based compliance, right? So when you look at third parties, or now if you go for government contracts or bid for government tenders, right? But in Singapore, they have what they call it's a data protection trust mark, right? Under the for personal data, right? Now, government in Singapore are actually requires the company who's bidding for tenders to actually have some sort of certification in place, right? So for areas or jurisdiction where there's no where there are no certification in place, so at least if you look at international best practices, certifications like ISO 27701, which covers the privacy information management system, can be deployed, and that could be a level of certification where now governments are actually looking for organizations to have at least when bidding for government tenders, right? So we have data DPTMs in Singapore. We also have the Credence Data Trust Rating System and also the European Data Protection Seals in the Europe, right? So in Singapore, a DPTM is a requirement in number of contracts, renewals, or in tender bidding, right? So similarly, in the Philippines, under the National Privacy Commission, right, they are actually providing measures, guidelines for organization to implement privacy and data protection measures, right? So I'm going to give you a simple example, right? If you were to look from an IT perspective, right? The security and privacy implication, right? Now, if you're looking at cyber attacks or ransomware, it's likely to hit your IT or server or database, right? Now, if you look at the privacy aspect from a traditional IT, right? So your privacy is good as your corporate policy, even if you have one, and even that policy actually addresses the gaps in the business itself, right? Right. And then you got to balance the priority, you got to balance in terms of the profits against the customer privacy, right? Well, compared to cloud, right, the corporate services are different from consumer, and now the cloud service providers do actually cater according to the customer's requirements, right? And gone are the days where the service provider just says, hey, this is it, take it or leave it. Now it's more of the customers requiring certain settings or certain specification in order for the service provider, in order for the organization to onboard the service provider. Now, under the security part of it, under the traditional IT, right, we look at the budget availability. Now, if you have big budgets, you can have huge servers, huge IT systems in the organization, right? But then again, you will need to provide the talent, and you need to ensure that 24/7 by 365, there's no downtime, right? And it's one of, I would say, a way, or I mean, it could be outdated because the DDoS attacks, right, could happen whether or not you're running a traditional IT or a cloud base, right? But in terms of security, service providers has now spent billions of dollars in ensuring that not only their infrastructure are meeting global standards, but they are also ensuring that their capacity to run that service is bigger than the attackers than the attackers themselves, right? So I'll take you through a quick tip for organizations out there who's looking to address compliance in data protection, right? Now, again, the data protection part, it's a subset of the security part where, again, there is overlaying factor, there's an overlaying portion in there, right? So if you already have your security committee, right, it's now the next step is to look into the data protection privacy aspect of it, right? And in the biggest part in a data protection law is looking into how information flows within an organization, what information you're collecting in an organization, right? Now, only when you know what information you're collecting, and in certain jurisdiction, there are information which is categorized as a sensitive data, right? Like the Malaysian law and also the Philippines law, there's a special category of sensitive personal data where additional care will need to be put in place when handling those information. Now, only when the proper risk assessment is being done and only proper or good policies, right? Now, if we've seen policies that don't jive with the business environment or policies that don't address the gaps in an organization, right? So a proper risk assessment will lead you to good controls in place, right? And the next part would be communicating all these initiatives to the entire organization, right? Again, coming back to cyber vaccination, right? It's important that everyone in and out the organization knows what can be done or what cannot be done, right? Because if they don't know, then it's a time bomb waiting to explode, right? And moving from the last part again, only when you know where your gaps are, and if you know how strong your policies are, and also you know what's happening, and also the people down on the ground knows what to do, then, pardon my French, if shit hits the fan, right, then the organization would actually know where to look at and how to address the situation. If not, everyone's going to run helter-skelter and yet not address the incident or not manage the incident properly, right? So with that, for those of you out there who wants to know more about data protection or privacy, right, you can always go to this website. There's a bunch of information resource out there available for you to explore, right? With that, thank you so much, and I hope this short session given, hope I've shared enough. Back to you, Pitra P.
Like you said, data now is like fuel, right? Big data is very important for companies around the world to have because it drives by data now these days. But of course, with solid policies, communications among, employees and organization, and of course, how to handle things when bad days happened. I think this is a very good checklist that organizations out there need to have as like their kind of formula to think about. So thank you very much, Benjamin. So now I'm gonna move on to another panelist Mary Jo Charade from Microsoft Digital Crimes Unit Asia. So, Mary, thank you very much for joining us. So, same questions to the previous panelists. Let me just repeat it to you again. So, why is it important for businesses to develop and implement cybersecurity practice, and how can both public and private corporations be enhanced in preventing ransomware?
Okay, so thanks for having me here. I will give just a high-level overview of our group, the Digital Crimes Unit. As you'll see here, among our missions and programs, ransomware features quite high on the list of things that we work on as a part of the Digital Crimes Unit. Among other things, malware and botnet takedowns, trying to disrupt the payments. People have talked about that in connection with a way to address the cybercrime issues. And so you heard earlier when Paul was going through what Trend Micro sees in terms of the spikes in various types of cybercrime. And I just wanted to take a step back because I think it's really helpful to think about why that is. And one of the reasons and things that Microsoft has seen is that you can actually become a cyber criminal without having any technical background whatsoever. So you can go into the onion router, you can go into the dark markets, and you can actually either hire somebody to attack some company or individual for you, or you can buy kits. And so, for example, in ransomware, for $66, you can buy a kit that will help you launch a ransomware attack at vulnerable companies, and then you share the ransom with the criminals who built that system. So they can also, for a very low fee, provide information about compromised PCs, especially, and I know it was talked about by a number of people, ones where they haven't done the updates and they haven't patched. And so the criminals, of course, they see these patches come out, they see what the patches are designed to fix, and then they start creating a way to take advantage of the people who don't patch. And so it's quite easy to find those unpatched systems. And so they collect that information and will sell it, even possibly to multiple people. So it's really fundamental that people understand that this isn't just a tight network of very well coordinated and very smart criminals, that it's really widespread, and the threat continues to grow in these marketplaces. So like what Paul was talking about, we also see a number of signals, and kind of tying into what Benjamin was talking about when he was showing the difference between the cloud and like an on-premises system. A lot of what Microsoft sees in terms of the attacks, and therefore what we can work to prevent, are in the cloud. So if a company has moved to the Microsoft cloud, then we are able to see a lot more of the threats that might be facing them, as opposed to if you think about if you kept all your servers on premises and you basically have your IT people trying to protect you, it's harder for us to help because we don't see that. It's really confined to your premises. So these are just the numbers behind the signals that we see, and these signals help us assess what the threats are and then what we should do about the threats. So I'll walk through what we're seeing in terms of the ransomware signals. And you can see very similar to what Trend Micro was talking about in Paul's presentation, an increase in ransomware encounters. In terms of industries, we do see, similar to the breakdown that Paul discussed, we see governments, manufacturing, insurance and financial. And really the reason we think that these are more prevalent is that they make better targets. They either have more money that they could pay higher ransoms, or they have other things that are of value, like intellectual property. So for example, in manufacturing, there's information that can actually be stolen and sold separately to a ransom. And that's something that once a ransomware actor has taken information from you, they can give you the decryptor to decrypt your information, but they've also taken it from you, and they are criminals. And so to think that you can trust that they're not going to do something with your information, I think would be trusting a bit too much. So they look for things of value. They look for government information, especially because they're trying to get personal information that they could then sell on the market. So at the beginning, where I was showing you that they would sell personal information, they also sell copies of driver's license, copies of passports, anything like that that they can get from any source. And so to monetize what they have is their fundamental focus. So like has been talked about in other contexts, in the digital crimes unit, when we address ransomware, we focus on following the payments, following the money. So we look at the infrastructure and payment and try to disrupt that. So you may have heard of some of the criminal referrals that Microsoft has done, as well as civil cases that we've filed ourselves in taking down botnets, and taking down the infrastructure. So we get a court order allowing us to take down the infrastructure. But we also, to the point of your question and the topic, we work closely with law enforcement on these, because we as an individual company can't do everything ourselves. It's impossible. And we really rely on entities like BSSN and other entities that that are focused on particular countries. We work with them to try to take these things down, because these people are located all over the world. We work on risk mitigation, helping victims. We take the information that we get in connection with our investigations and actually feed that into our products. And so that's something that then makes them better and stronger. And then finally, we advocate for those areas where we need to enhance the cybercrime legislation in order for all of us to be able to take action against the criminals. So sometimes, just because of how quickly the world spins and the cybercrime develops, sometimes the laws are harder, they have a harder time keeping up with the things that criminals are doing. So we'll work to advocate for changes in legislation. And so in terms of the public-private partnerships, this is a very limited example, because our partnerships actually that Microsoft has engaged in go far beyond this. But you'll see Trend Micro is on here. You'll also see that companies that Microsoft might traditionally compete with. So Google, for example, is a competitor of Microsoft's, but you see Google on there. And the reason for that is that all of us have to work together. It can't just be Microsoft works with law enforcement, Trend Micro works with law enforcement, Google. We all have to work together, because we each see a different piece and we each have different information. And so it's really important that we work together and that we try to address the cybercrime. And but at the same time continuing our individual efforts as well, because I think it's important that all of those continue. So one thing that I would say in terms of what we see improving, but it still could be improved more, is victims' willingness to come forward when they have been attacked and let law enforcement know, or otherwise be public about that. Because in part, it can seem sometimes as though there aren't very many attacks, because victims don't want to harm their reputation. They don't want their customers to lose confidence in them. And that's understandable. But by the same token, people might think that it's not as prevalent as it is. And also, there is information that law enforcement can can help with in terms of like providing decryptors, which law enforcement sometimes they'll have the decryptor for that particular type of ransomware. So what I would say just in closing that partnerships, public-private partnerships are a key foundation and fundamental to success. And we will not address cybercrime if we don't have these partnerships. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Mary, for that very interesting information. And yeah, I must admit, I never knew before that, ransomware can be done without any like sophistication of technical background or anything. It's quite concerning to know that somebody can just buy a kit to target vulnerable people. So thank you so much for sharing with us. And we're gonna move on to the Q&A session now. I think I'm gonna address to Benjamin. So Benjamin, as Mary mentioned earlier, the importance of partnership, even like with competitors. Do you agree with what she said, and why is it important for like all partners, or both public and private sector, to work together? Why is it so important? What do you think?
I totally agree with what Mary says. The importance of partnership. One is if we would look at things that Google do and things that Microsoft do, right? It could be somewhat similar, but different as well, right? So the areas and expertise are different, right? So hence why the partnerships are important to address different areas of experts, right? So in fact, when we speak to the regulators, although the regulators are the ones enforcing, right, a lot of the support is actually coming from the private sector, right, ensuring that the competencies of the enforcement agencies, the competency of in the organizations. I mean, there's the support from the regulators to the organization, and also organization to the regulators. Yeah, so that's why I see that everyone's got somewhat similar, but in a way different roles to play. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Benjamin. And to Paul, who are from both Trend Micro and also a liaison for Interpol. So you are working on both kind of players here. So can you share with us your experiences, like the importance of this partnership from different sectors, and like what have you done better with this partnership?
Well, yeah, as a liaison to Interpol, I'm very proud to share with you some of the experiences. So as I have mentioned earlier, it's not only ransomware, but we are dealing with different cyber attacks. So on like a monthly basis, we receive some requests for information from Interpol. So basically, that's my work. They provide a request for information that, let's say, this member country has encountered ransomware, but most of them is related to ransomware. That's the sad thing about it. And usually they would request for, is there any decryption? That's number one question always, because we know that the companies or the target was not prepared for the ransomware infection. But yeah, so about some of our activities with Interpol, we have provided them some intelligence. It's not just a quick, solution, or as I have mentioned earlier, like when we dealt with the club ransomware, we were actually investigating it for 2 years, and after 2 years, just like that, the Interpol, and of course, it's not only Interpol, with the global coordinate efforts with some of, I think from the US law enforcement and others, and also in Ukraine, they were able to provide a concrete solution, at least on the side of tracing the crypto wallets, who owns it, where was it spent by the actors, and from there they were able to identify the 5 suspected criminals. So I think the data sets that we provided also helped in a way that in their continuous investigation, they would definitely do the attribution part, find the linkages, which one is important, of course, because of course we don't want also to, let's say, waste their time. In fact, that we need to give them the most important data for them to move forward. So I guess that's my point.
All right. Thank you very much, Paul. And to Mary, I'm just wondering, with the COVID-19 pandemic, has like the damage been worsened from your research that you may know of?
Yes, it has been. One of the things that was talked about earlier was how phishing is often the first step in infecting a computer, because someone opens up a file that is infected. And so we saw a big spike starting at the beginning of the pandemic, where the email that someone would open had something to do with COVID. And everyone was hungry for information at that time. Everybody was wondering, what are the statistics? What are the numbers? How is it going to impact my job, my family, my country? And so they would say, attached is your application for financial assistance during COVID, or something like that. Attached are the latest numbers and how to protect yourself or something. And they make it look as though it comes from an authority. And then when the person clicks on it, there are macros or otherwise there's malicious code that then loads onto their computer. And so at the time that all of us were working from home, I think it was a little harder for IT to be able to manage this. So some people might even be working from their personal computer at home as opposed to the computer that their company issued to them, which the company then doesn't control and doesn't have the ability to control. And so it makes it really challenging. So we definitely saw criminals taking advantage of that. And I would say that going forward, that will continue to happen because they want a higher percentage of people to open the file. So anytime there's national news, if there's an election, if anything like that, will be a lure. But the good thing about COVID is it's a worldwide lure, right? You don't have to tailor it for Thailand. You can have it, everybody cares about that topic. So that was definitely a huge factor.
Right, yeah, indeed. Sounds challenging with the pandemic. And earlier you mentioned, Mary, victims' willingness, like the thing that you want to improve on victims' willingness. How do you promote that happening? How do you encourage victims to come out more?
Yeah, I think it is challenging because there are legal concerns about coming out. So any victim, the first thing they would do is speak to their attorneys and make sure that that this is something they should do. But if they decide to do that, I think that it can be so beneficial that it can outweigh the some of the detriment from that. I think some governments also will disclose it anyway, and so it's better to get out ahead of it, I think, for them to talk about it proactively. And I think just to share information, even if they aren't publicly sharing it with the news media, but to share it with law enforcement so that law enforcement knows what's happening and can incorporate that into the work that they're doing already. Because we've heard from a number of law enforcement representatives, and I think they represent the world's law enforcement, that they're really focused on cybercrime and they're working on cases every day. So I think that they just need to know that they can help deal with the criminals, but only by reporting.
Can I add to what she has said?
Of course.
So, yeah, I would like just to say that I think the government needs to encourage the victims, like the companies, to report to the government, so that let's say the government or the law enforcement, they should have the data. They should have the data keeping. But of course, it depends on the country. Let's say, I think recently in Australia, they have implemented about it's required, to if you are infected by ransomware, you need to report to the government. So same goes with the other countries. But yeah, I think the government must also, identify some of the verticals for these types of sectors to protect from ransomware. So of course, the number one priority is like the critical infrastructure. They're critical in the industry or economy. And let's say the manufacturing. Why? Is because they are also very reliant. Let's say that manufacturing is one of the important in economy, so that the government must also guide the them on how to prevent the attacks. So, and one more example is like, let's say in my country, in the Philippines, the business process outsourcing or BPO is very rampant, and that I think we don't have, or the government must focus on, let's say, on this type of sector, because I think there is one also case of it before. A BPO company got hit by ransomware. So that the government must know how to prioritize which sector should be. And so vice versa, that the companies will be willing to, report.
Let me just stay with you again, Paul. Just one more question.
Yes,
So
of
like
course.
with the trend, and statistics and numbers you have, just wonder, what about the future outlook? Are we moving towards like a more positive kind of prevention against ransomware, or not quite yet?
As I have showed you earlier, so just to be quick, no, you can see that in this year it's increasing, as Microsoft also, Mary also presented earlier. Actually, Microsoft is billions of detections, so overwhelming detections that about ransomware. So we expect, because the threat actors are also advancing. Even law enforcement are doing their best, but the threat actors, because of their strong affiliation and program, say when they're hiring some ransomware operators, it should be professional. It has to be like a background in ransomware as a service, and even insider, they can, the Lockbit 2.0, even insider, they can recruit. And also their selling points like fast encryption of it, so that a lot of runs, and same with Mary mentioned earlier, like just very cheap, no, the ransomware kits, very easy for an individual to perform ransomware. But yeah, we don't tolerate.
Right. Okay. So the future outlook is still quite concerning. So I think lastly to Benjamin. So what can the private sector do? I mean, like primarily apart from things you've already said, because this doesn't look very good out in the future.
Well, I think the the private sector shouldn't be afraid to actually engage the public sector, right? If you look into the agencies and so on. Of course, the more now we talk about big data, the more information we have, the more the agency or the agency are able to analyze and perhaps come out with more more effective control, right? And therefore those controls can then be shared across the industry, right? I think, for example, like we've seen how cloud service providers now have also private clouds, and then I mean I don't know what else additional controls they have, or settings that they may have, right? So it does, the information's got to be input to through the agency, and I guess the agency will then have sufficient resource to support the industry with it.
Okay, thank you very much to all panelists joining us for the second session today. Very, very informative and resourceful. Thank you very much. Many thanks to all the panelists for their experiences and discussion today, and also the interesting video from the UNODC. I think we have indeed learned a lot today about ransomware, its effects, and how to protect ourselves from it. So what I take with me from this webinar is definitely how easily possible it is for any one of us to fall victim of ransomware attack, and what I can do to prevent that from happening. So definitely I will be even more selective when it comes to sharing personal information and not putting off backup my data more regularly and update antivirus program, definitely. On top of that, I need to remind myself to set a strong password and not be appealed to suspicious websites that could end up triggering ransomware attacks. Similar practices can totally be applied in businesses and organizations as well, from identifying sensitive data, running regular backup, updating virus software, to restricting unsolicited links. Businesses can definitely benefit from these basic protocols and keep their data safe from cybersecurity threats, especially as businesses now transcend organizational boundaries by working with more diverse cultures, policies, practices, and regulations. Ensuring online security has also become ever more so necessary. All organizations should conduct co-organizational training and education to ensure everyone has the same level of awareness on cybersecurity, preventions, and practices. And for the government agencies, it is also essential for them to respond quickly to ransomware emergency while maintaining comprehensive and legal cybersecurity framework adhered to the national security practices. But from what we learned today about ransomware, I must say that as much as it is terrifying, but with the advancing technology combined with our awareness, cybersecurity solutions have become more prominent. Not only they can help organizations detect cyber attacks, at the same time, they also help counter the threats as well. But that's, of course, not to undermine the importance of ransomware prevention and awareness from everybody to start with. Thank you again to all the panelists and every participants for joining today's event on the RansomAware campaign. I'm Petra P. Shomshin. Thank you.